Welcome to The Connector, where we connect North Carolina to ideas and North Carolinians to each other. This podcast series is from the Institute for Emerging Issues at North Carolina State University. And now to the conversation.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the first episode of this new season of The Connector. I'm Tarik Woods. I'm the Public Policy and Program Manager here at the Institute for Emerging Issues. And I'm joined here today by Dr. Michael Cline, who is the State Demographer with the Office of Budget and Management here for North Carolina, and Alyssa Moseley, who is the Director of Research at the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina. Thank you both for joining us here today.
Thank you.
As we know, North Carolina is growing rapidly, and that doesn't come as a surprise to many of us. By 2050, we're expected to surpass 14 million people calling North Carolina home. That would surpass Georgia and Ohio, making us the seventh most populous state in the country. We know that these shifts are coming from people, an influx of people and industries. And today's conversation, we're really going to talk about what trends make this happen and why North Carolina is so attractive. Dr. Cline, would you care to give us just a couple things about yourself before we get started?
Sure. I'm the State Demographer, work in the Office of Budget Management here in North Carolina. I'm a new migrant to North Carolina, moved here about almost 8 years ago from Texas, where I spent most of my career in the State Demographer's office in Texas and at Rice University.
Thank you. Alyssa?
Yes, I'm the Director of Research, been at EDPNC for about a year and a half now, and we support growing the state's economy. A lot of research goes into that information on the labor market, business climate, taxes, growth, all of that stuff. So it's really been a really exciting time to do this work.
Thank you so much. So Mike, first I want to start with you. A lot of people like myself until here recently, didn't know that North Carolina had a state demographer and really don't know what that means. So can you tell us more about your role and what the state demographer does?
Sure. So everybody knows about the census that happens every 10 years, but a lot of things change in between those 10 years. So both the Census Bureau and the state of North Carolina produces population estimates every year to keep up with what's happening in North Carolina, to look at growth in municipalities and counties and the state as a whole. My role is important in that I work in the budget office. A lot of funds are distributed to local communities based on population numbers or partially on population numbers. An example is most municipalities get money from the state through the PAL bill or street aid funds to local communities to support street maintenance. There's arts funding, there's retail sales taxes that are distributed on a per capita basis. So in order to provide the most recent population numbers, I produce those on an annual basis. In addition, of course, for the state, particularly growing state, we need to plan for transportation, schools, a lot of other government resources. And so we do population projections. The current projections that we have out are through 2050, as you just mentioned. We're working on projections through 2060 so that we can plan for roads and schools, and also businesses can plan for what will be happening in North Carolina.
Absolutely. And part of our forum series for over the next 3 years is community infrastructure and what it's going to take to prepare for that future. Exactly what you're talking about. It explains how I found what you do and found your role. We know that North Carolina is growing quickly, but can you shed some light on just how rapidly is North Carolina growing in comparison to some of our neighboring states in the Southeast?
Sure. Well, actually, some of our neighboring states are growing rapidly as well. So South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia are growing fairly rapidly. All of us, and including North Carolina, are on annual basis since 2020, a little over 1%, about 1.2, 1.3% on an annual basis. We're gaining because we're an area, our state is beautiful. And so we have folks that are coming from the Northeast, from other parts of the country, coming to North Carolina.
They're not just fleeing the cold weather.
No, well, that's part of it. So, part of it is we're lucky because, in fact, I don't think people really who grew up in North Carolina really appreciate how beautiful the state is. No matter where you are, it's a beautiful state. beautiful areas. And so we benefit from the fact that as we talk about people moving here, certainly people looking for lower cost of living, but also looking for a beautiful place to live. Particularly, we have retirees in other states and in North Carolina looking for a place to retire. And so people who are retirement age are looking for areas around beaches, areas around mountains, areas around lakes, everything that North Carolina has. In addition to that, we have growth related to industries, which
Absolutely. Well, my last question for you is, are there any particular reasons or trends that you're seeing when you pull these reports that could explain why there's this shift in people and industry that they're coming, I guess, not just to North Carolina, but to the Southeast in general?
Yeah. So I mentioned it earlier. So it's partly the climate, the weather. You're not shoveling snow in the Northeast, but there's also we have invested, as North Carolinians have invested since the 50s, 60s, and 70s and on, with changing our economy from a more agricultural economy to a more broad-based economy. So we have the Research Triangle that attracts younger people into Raleigh and finance in Charlotte. So those are some of the things that are drawing people here, at least at the younger ages, the working ages. And then you have retirees moving into those areas of natural beauty, as well as into our urban areas to be closer to family or closer to medical care.
Has anything particularly surprised you, I guess, and when you're looking at these trends for North Carolina, what jumps out as you as surprising for someone who's been looking at this for a while?
So as a demographer, these are not surprising, but maybe surprising to other folks. We have shifted in North Carolina. For most of North Carolina's history, we were a net exporter of people. For most of our history, people were migrating to Tennessee, to Texas, to other parts of the United States. In the early 20th century, they moved to the Northeast or Midwest to opportunities there. But as our economy diversified and we began to have industry here, people started coming back. All of our growth for most of our history was through natural increase, more births than deaths. Over the last several decades, that has shifted. So that in the last 3 or so decades, about 2/3 of our growth was through through net migration, and the remainder through natural increase. What has shifted now, particularly with the baby boom generation, is now we're getting to a point where we're getting closer to the fact that all of our growth will be from net migration. Right now, since 2020, natural increase has accounted for about 8 to 10% of our growth. All the remainder of that is net migration. So people from moving from other states and from other countries to North Carolina.
Is there a particular region in the country, and this is just curious, that people are coming to North Carolina or the general Southeast for more often than others, by any chance?
So you're talking about different parts of the state?
More people coming from the Northeast or coming from the West Coast?
From where they're coming from?
Yeah.
So like I said, there's always been a migration pattern between the Northeast and Midwest to North Carolina. That's going both ways, but now it's mostly coming this way. There's a pattern of folks from Florida. Some of those are what we call halfbacks, people who were in the Northeast, went to Florida and decided it wasn't that great and then came halfway back.
Gotcha.
A lot of those folks go into the western part of the state, interestingly enough. So those are kind of the areas. And then, of course, most people don't migrate very far. So you've got folks moving from our neighboring states to North Carolina.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much, Mike. I appreciate it. Alyssa, North Carolina's population is growing, and Mike gave us a great overview of where they're coming from and what that looks like. EDPNC, like you mentioned, has this great team that's able to track what industry is looking like across North Carolina. Governor Cooper just recently announced, North Carolina has seen more than 20,000 clean energy jobs come into North Carolina in the last 8 years. So this influx of people and industry is bringing jobs along with it to North Carolina's communities. So what do you attribute all of this industry growth to? And is there anything that surprises you when you're looking at the immense number of jobs that have moved to North Carolina in less than a decade?
Yeah. Yeah, the growth has been crazy. I think North Carolina just has that right combination of factors. Most companies are looking for, like you mentioned, a good cost of living. We've got a really strong workforce story with all of these people moving here. Really strong education system. NC State is one of the largest engineering schools in the country. And so when you look at the talent that it's producing, along with our other 51 higher education, well, I'll say universities, and then our community college system, that's a huge plus for companies. Our business costs, taxes overall. I think that right combination of those kind of top 3 or 4 factors that companies really evaluate, North Carolina just checks the boxes for those. And I think post-pandemic, there's been this really huge evolution of growth in the Southeast. North Carolina is one of the largest states in the Southeast. We have a lot of land, a lot of sites to develop on. And so that's really appealing for companies as well.
Yeah. And something you said was really interesting there. It's appealing, and we're seeing this growth that's kind of moving across the state. It's not super isolated. Can you speak any more to like how some of these industries are choosing where they're going throughout North Carolina? Like, what does that choice look like?
Yeah, it is really interesting. I think to answer your question too about something that maybe jumps out at you about the clean energy field, North Carolina has a really broad range of suppliers from raw materials, right, more towards the west, right outside of Charlotte, and in the mountains, there's mining, different parts like lithium, spruce pine. North Carolina has a quartz mine, and it's like the only quartz that are used in certain microchips. Like that's where it comes from. So there's a lot of raw materials and suppliers that are attracting these clean energy companies to North Carolina. I think lately a lot of our universities are creating curriculums that are very driven to create talent that has these skills, particularly in engineering. And it's not just NC State, which has a really strong engineering program on its own. North Carolina A&T has partnered with different companies in the Winston-Salem, Greensboro area to develop industry-specific curriculum around semiconductor and skills related to that. UNC Charlotte's doing a lot around battery research. So it really is a statewide effort to create this holistic spectrum of meeting industry demands.
That's great. And you mentioned the lithium mine that's in the southwestern part of North Carolina, major component of battery storage, which North Carolina is producing just so much of because we have those raw materials. So definitely agree with you there. My next question for you is about energy jobs and the economy overall in North Carolina. North Carolina has a really diverse energy mix. EDPNC has this clean energy economy future outline and strategy that they're really trying to implement and assist with. What about clean energy is so unique and so necessary for our future energy infrastructure that EDPNC's kind of like stepped it out and given it its own platform?
I think there's just a lot of opportunity in the clean energy field. I think lately, when we hear clean energy, a lot of people associate that with electric vehicles, but it really is a wide spanning portfolio of opportunities in clean energy. It can mean a lot. Our existing energy utilities, for example, are doing a lot to diversify their energy offerings away from just coal generated electricity. There's nuclear. There's a lot of natural gas in North Carolina to tap into. So there's diversification there. There's been a lot under Governor Roy Cooper's administration to drive some progress in wind energy along the coast. There's some capacity there. And so I think that's kind of been a driving factor. But then again, you have so many different suppliers in North Carolina that produce different pieces. I look at some of the most recent announcements that have happened across the state, and a lot of them are producing just little tiny things that go into a battery that you wouldn't necessarily know is a part of it, right? Like an example, I went to a conference a couple weeks ago, and the CEO was talking about their company, and they just make a little film that goes into batteries used for all sorts of things, not just electric vehicles. And that film is what enables energy transfer, something about electrodes. I don't know the science behind it, there's a lot of really cool innovations in North Carolina. It's not just electric vehicles and batteries. There's a lot of different avenues that you can go down. And so there's a lot of diversification opportunity there.
Well, thank you so much. And now I've got just one question for the both of you before we close. And it's a really tough one. What is the most pressing challenge that North Carolina's energy infrastructure faces to get ready for this influx of industry and people in the future? Alyssa, you want to start first?
Yeah, I can try. I think a huge challenge, it's not just unique to North Carolina, but it's accommodating for all of the growth, general population growth, but also in these energies that are going to be industries that will be intensive users of energy, and making sure that you have the infrastructure to allow all of those activities to happen. The EDPNC does a really good job of making sure, working with companies like Duke Energy to make sure, hey, if this company goes at this site, what does energy usage look like? There's a lot of coordination on the back end there. But, with some of these unprecedented sized job announcements lately, that's going to be a pretty big thing, is making sure that these communities are equipped just to handle the influx of people. I think we're on a good path to do it, but it's definitely a challenge.
For sure.
Yeah.
What, I think not just clean energy work, but just all industries, the biggest challenge, I think, from a demographic perspective, is the aging of our population. And so the challenge is, you can look back in the 1950s, for every one person retiring or reaching retirement age, there were 3 people coming in to the working ages. Now that relationship is about a 1-to-1, and depending on what part of the state you're on, in some of the rural counties, it's actually less than 1-to-1.
Wow.
So the challenge will be either using technology, which will require more energy, or finding more workers.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us here. To learn more about the 2025 Emerging Issues Forum on Future Forward Energy, please check out emergingissues.org. Thank you so much, Alyssa and Mike, for joining us today. And until next time, let's all stay connected.
Yeah.
This has been a presentation from the Institute for Emerging Issues at North Carolina State University. To learn more, please visit us at emergingissues.org.